So I was involved in, in the community before starting at UCLA. And so in 1968, uh, and I was working at USC doing my graduate work there, working on my doctorate, and was working for public policy. And I was working at this center called the Center for Social Action, which was a center to do leadership training and community organization training for primarily African American and Latino community organizations. And so I was assistant director of the center, and the director was my faculty advisor. And so I was, enjoying that because it was working primarily in uh, communities of color, working with grassroots organization to try to assist them in their capacity building, organizing meetings, doing how to organize different kinds of activities and things like that. So I was enjoying that. It was great. But at the time, that's when there was a burgeoning Asian American identity movement that was beginning to happen. And so to show you kind of our thinking, I was involved in the planning of the center, but we had a leadership training for blacks and Latinos, but not anything for Asian Americans. And I was confronted by that as we were, growing consciousness. And so my initial response is, well, Asian Americans we don't need that kind of organizing, kind of thing in our communities, et cetera. So it wasn't until later that we started an Asian American component. But so while I was there, though, there was beginning of kind of an Asian American identity. At UCLA, there was the RU Yellow conference that happened, I think, in spring of '69, or maybe, yeah. And so a lot of things were going on. In the fall of '68, we started the Los Angeles chapter of the Asian American Political Alliance. And in,
Let me go back just a bit before we go on too much further. When you said that at first you didn't think Asian Americans needed that, I think we all did,
yeah.
and that was the, sort of the society. Can you go into that a little bit more, and then maybe sort of how you got interested in this kind of work to begin with? I know the free speech movement at
Yeah.
UC Berkeley was big for you, so maybe just lead
Okay,
me up
you're
to
going
that.
back further.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah,
then
the
also why you thought Asian Americans didn't need this.
yeah, well, it was kind of in phases, and so the most significant phase was when I was a freshman student at UC at Berkeley, and it was during the free speech movement was occurring during that time, and I didn't know what was going on. My first experience with the free speech movement was uh, crossing a picket line to go to my classes, and so I'd never seen this picket line, and I was, being the good diligent student I was, said, well, I don't know what's going on, but I've got to get to my section. It was a section of a class, and so I crossed the picket line. People kind of were yelling, and I was thinking, what's going on here? And I go into my class, and the TA is not there because he's part of the picket line, and about half the students are not there because they're on strike. So I go, okay, well, so then I figured I've got to find out what's going on, and that was my first kind of aha moment that. Uh, when a picket line is thrown up or something like that, there's no such thing as being neutral. You are either supporting or you're against it. But you can't kind of sit there on the side and act like, well, this doesn't involve me. So I began to find out more why the students and my TA and others were kind of organizing the strike, and I understood the issues. I said, well, that's not right. The administration shouldn't be able to decide what speakers are going to be there and approve, kind of where you can have things. And so I joined the strike, and was out picketing, and that was my first kind of action politically. And so that really, kind of opened up a different thing in the conversations I had with people, and it got me to change my major. And so I was a struggling first-year student in mathematics as a major, doing awful, and trying to figure out in my second year of calculus what the world this was. And but I got so engaged in talking with other activists and others in terms of what was going on. So I changed my major to political science in my sophomore year, and never looked back. I mean, just from a GPA perspective, I was a struggling C student at best, kind of thing. I was, after my freshman year, had a 2.2 GPA, and I was so happy that I hadn't flunked out, that I said, great, I didn't flunk out. But then after I kind of got involved in political science as a major, I just kind of came alive. I started learning more. I started reading more. I started kind of getting in arguments, and that's where I met Yvonne, because she was much more conservative than I was, and so we would have these, and these conversations about politics and things like that. And so it was a very enlightening and engaging time for me. And so, but my initial involvements after Species Movement were kind of focusing on the civil rights movement and what was going on in terms of voter registration in the South. This was right after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 had been passed. And so focusing a lot of those issues and the Vietnam War and beginning to get involved in anti-Vietnam War activities. But for the civil rights movement, it was I saw myself as kind of this liberal that was supporting, voter registration in the South and, people going down to the South to register voters. I saw things as a black-white issue, and how, rights were being denied to blacks in the South, et cetera, but didn't see that affecting me directly. I thought it being supporting, getting more civil rights for African Americans. And then it was not until later, like I think probably 1966, that then Stokely Carmichael, who became Kwame Ture, issued the call, with H. Rap Brown for Black Power. And I was involved with SNCC, Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, and that was really sent some shockwaves. Because, he was talking about, we really need to focus on Black Power, which is engaging and empowering our communities. And he was talking to the white folks involved, because if you really care about creating change and, for our movement, instead of organizing buses to the South, maybe you should engage in conversations with your parents and your relatives and your friends and get them to understand what's going on, et cetera. So organize within your own communities to do work. And so, so he gave a speech on campus around that. And so I'm sitting here going, well, that kind of makes sense. I said, but where's my community? So I was thinking, this is organizing with other white people, kind of thing to, kind of do that. And so, that was where I was having my own sense of identity, because I didn't see there was an Asian American community to be organizing out of. And Berkeley at that time, unlike the current time, I think Asian Americans are probably less than 5% of the campus, and so there wasn't a sense of engagement, and most, and the Asians that were on the campus identified as Chinese, Japanese, Filipino. There wasn't a sense of Asian, or there was no Asian American identity at that time, but even any sense of, that we should be working together, that there was some common links that we had. And so that was kind of, where I was being, and then kind of coinciding with that, my senior year at Berkeley, while I was involved politically and doing other things, I was preparing for a research paper, in political science for a class. And I was in the stacks, in the old days where you had books and you would, find these books and then read them in the stacks, et cetera. And I ran across a book, Managed Casualty by Carrie McWilliams, and John Kitsuse. And in there was a paragraph where it said, it says, Manzanar, one of 10 relocation centers in which Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. And that's the first time I saw the term Manzanar in print or even heard. I knew I was born in Manzanar, but I had assumed that Manzanar was just a agricultural camp that my family happened to be at in Central California during, when I was born. And so when they talk about camp, I always thought it was like an agricultural camp, and that, because they would only talk about camp in the good old days, and so from Block 22 was, and so it never occurred to me. And then the first time I saw it in print, the term Manzanar, I thought, one of 10 relocations for Japanese, so this kind of, even with the coded language, kind of thing, I said, this is unusual. I never heard of this, kind of thing. So I went, when I went home, I'd ask my parents about it, and they just wouldn't want to talk about it. They go, oh yeah, it was camp. Yeah, we were put in camp, and they obviously did not want to speak about it. And so, which piqued my interest more. And so I started trying to read more, and there wasn't a lot of material available. I think there was the book by Alan Bosworth, America's Concentration Camps. And then Roger Daniels had written some articles, but I just didn't know much. But then as I learned more, then I began to understand a little bit more about that and my identity as a Japanese American, and the significance of being born in Manzanar. And so all of that kind of carried with me, and then I began my graduate work at USC in 1967, and and so that's kind of where I was. But I developed definitely a kind of activist orientation from my kind of life at Berkeley, and I carry that on in terms of doing my master's degree there, and then working on my doctorate. And so I was planning on in '68, when Yvonne and I got married. I proposed to her because I had received this fellowship to do a internship at the Housing Urban Development in Washington, D.C. And so was planning on kind of getting my master's, taking this relatively prestigious fellowship in Washington, D.C. It was kind of a very competitive kind of thing. And so that was planned. So I asked Yvonne to marry me. She foolishly said yes. And we were planning at that time to move to Washington, D.C. right after school, and get settled. And in between that time, there was all these things beginning to bubble up, in the community, and this sense of this Asian American identity. And it became very exciting to kind of hear this. And then my faculty advisor got a grant to do this leadership training and community organizing, and asked me to take this measly paying little job, kind of thing. And so Yvonne and I discussed this, and we decided to turn down the fellowship in DC and get engaged with the Center for Social Action. And that was a real turning point, because my plans prior to that was to get my doctorate in public policy. I had a whole career plan in mind. I was going to, kind of work in D.C., come back here, work for Congressman Roy Ball in East Los Angeles as a legislative aide. Then I was going to run for, state assembly in the Silver Lake area. So I had this kind of political plans to kind of be moving up and onward. And so that changed with what became the movement. And I became more engaged in communities, primarily Black and Latino communities at that time. But then we began to organize more as Asian Americans. And so, we started the Asian American Political Alliance. We started a lot of other things. You were part of the Asian American Experimental College that we did. We had a conference, an identity conference at USC that followed the RU Yellow conference. So we did a lot of those things, and we're really focusing on what it meant to be Asian Americans. It was a very engaging and empowering time, where it unleashed in many of us a sense of we have a community, we have issues, and we need to organize and engage and empower our communities. So that was what was happening. And so by 1969, I was fully involved in it, but I was still planning on finishing my dissertation, continuing this work. But then I met with Yuji Ichioka, and he came by the center, because I had worked with him, when he was, with the Asian American Political Alliance. And, he talked about, well, we just got, some funding for an Asian American Studies Center at UCLA, and I'll be working there, and, Franklin Odo will be working there, Philip Huang will be the director, and we're looking for a student community projects coordinator. And he kind of, said, well, you'd be good, but he also said, we don't have anyone else that can do this, and so I said, okay, so I thought about it, because I had one path, doctoral work, doing leadership training in Black and Latino communities, et cetera. and then doing things with the Asian American Studies Center. And so I talked to Yvonne, and we decided to, it was to go work at the Asian American Studies Center. And so that was the context for me doing all of that. And so I started in the summer of '69. And my initial work was, organizing a lot of student and community activities and engaging students, both in the student organizations on the campus, but also getting students involved in community organizations, things of that nature. And so that's kind of how it all started. But it was certainly not what I expected. It was just a crazy time. We didn't really know what we were doing. My first semester on the campus, I was, I had to develop courses to teach for the spring term. I remember developing one course that I worked a weekend to work on this course syllabus. And so, I was just, we were all kind of flying by the seat of our pants because there weren't a lot of books, there weren't a lot of courses that were available to look at. And so we were always just running around trying to figure out what are we supposed to be doing, how do we engage this. But in my role there, and particularly given the history of the Study Center in terms of the role of students and community and getting the Study Center going, I felt it very important that we continue to engage students in the Study Center. And so I saw my job as continuing to kind of be involved with student organizations, to try to figure out, be a linkage between student organizations and communities, to try to figure out ways we could kind of bring some of those things together. And so that,
Were you a student still at SC at that time?
I yeah, I was I was finishing my final coursework and during my first year at UCLA. And then my second year at UCLA, when I was the acting director of the Study Center, I was also took my qualifying exams, and so I was moving along the doctoral path, but
And how old were you at that time?
24.
So not too much older than the students then.
No, and so yeah, I mean, it was there were it was good and bad parts of being engaged there. I mean, there was a lot of energy, a lot of enthusiasm. I was very much a peer of most of the students in terms of that, and especially in relationship to other staff that were at the Study Center, And so I was more kind of a link between the students and what was going on in the Study Center. I was also kind of an advocate for the continuing role of students in the Study Center, and the director at that time saw Asian American Studies as a kind of a research unit and scholarly activity, and he saw it as a place where faculty members could do research, et cetera. So he had a very kind of traditional model for what what ethnic studies and Asian American studies should be. The other three members were Elsie Uematsu, who was our office manager, but Franklin was busy doing curriculum. Yuji was doing research kinds of things, but they were not engaged with students. They were doing their own thing, so to speak. And so I felt it very important that I play that role. And so the first semester was getting to know the students, working with student organizations, supporting a lot of activities going on. Second semester was continuing doing that, but also teaching a couple courses. And that really blew me away, to be having to teach on a subject that there wasn't a lot of material available, and I was literally just a week or two ahead of the students in terms of what I would be teaching. So I had a lot of guest lecturers come in, and it was somewhat traumatizing to me personally to have to be teaching these classes with students that were like a couple years younger than me, and having to, and my views of what a faculty member was from my own graduate work, in terms of I should be the expert, I should be being able to guide and lead, and I'm thinking, I don't know much more than any of these, and so it was really a tough time. And so so after that, I was, kind of planning on, kind of continuing that, but I was looking at the second year being a little easier than the first, which was really a crazy time. And but after the spring semester, or during the spring semester, the director decided to retire, or to resign and move back to his faculty status full time. And that was fine. But they looked for an acting director, uh, there wasn't anyone to step up. And Yuji was not interested. He would have been an awful administrator. Franklin was working on his dissertation and just was not in a position where he could do that. And so there wasn't anyone inside. And there were a couple faculty members on the campus that were possible candidates, but most of us did not want them associated with the study center and felt it would be a disaster. And so I ended up at the ripe old age of 24, 20, yeah, kind of having to step in. And that was, again, an exciting time, but traumatic in many ways. Here I was at 24 years of age attending meetings with the provost, was David Saxon at the time, with other deans and others who were all 20 to 30 years older than me. And you could tell they could think, who is this, kind of young guy? And so it was not fun having to be the face of the Asian American Studies Center at that time and doing the things that we were trying to do. And I took the job seriously. I tried to, I think we did a lot of good things during that time. But the long-term impact was I just quit my doctoral program because I didn't want anything to do with teaching and higher ed at that point, because I said, this is, I was just too young to be exposed to that level of things, and just got, soured on kind of moving in a career in academia. And also got soured on kind of this electoral politics career. And I was still engaged in community organizations, things like that. So then I had a chance to study and live in Japan. So I left the study center, and Yvonne and I lived in Japan for like 9 months. And after that, we came back. Yvonne was pregnant with our first child. Our plans, to give you some historic context, our plans at that time was we were in, primarily in Japan, but to go to China to visit and to have our daughter in China. And so that was the kind of plans. But this was before China really opened up, kind of thing. And so Yvonne was approved to go to China, but I was not. By the Chinese government. And so, because she was overseas, she's viewed as overseas Chinese. And so we thought, well, that's not going to work, kind of thing. Because we planned to, we had romanticized notions of China. And so we wanted to have a child in China. We wanted to kind of be able to kind of understand Chinese society a little bit more. And so we had to come back, because it was either then staying in Japan, having the baby in Japan, et cetera, or coming back. So we came back when Yvonne was like 8 months pregnant, and we had to lie about how pregnant she was so we could get on the plane. And so we came back, and I was unemployed, didn't know what I was going to be doing. And so that was kind of how it all worked, in terms of, after the study center experience.
I wanted to ask you about your article, The Oriental Lesbian and Minority,
Mm-hmm.
you did in Ghidra. So that was in
68. April of 69 then.
April of 69?
Yeah.
No, May of 69.
Okay.
It came out in the May issue,
Mm-hmm.
which was the second issue of Ghidra. So May 69, you were at the center then?
No, I was still at USC at that time.
USC. So can you talk about, because still I think it's such a seminal article. It was then, and I think it is still today. And it was very, there was a lot in a little space, but it really provided context of, like you had said, Asians within a previously black-white sort of context. So can you talk about how you came, I know you wrote it very fast, you said, and so
Yes.
can you talk about how, and talk about the article?
Well, yeah, the article was basically, because during my graduate work, I was, reading different kind of articles, and there was a notion of what was called a middleman minority, but it was being applied primarily internationally, like the roles that Indians played in South Africa, the roles that Jews played in Europe. And so most of the research was focused upon uh, ethnic groups that developed a certain niche within a society and played an important role within that society and had a certain level of privileges more than other minority groups in that society and played a functional role in terms of having that niche. But also during times of stress, et cetera, were then scapegoated by the powers that be for their role at that time. And so the notion of middleman minority, kind of resonated with me as something that applied to Asian Americans in the context of U.S. race relationships. That we were typically, we were kind of allowed a certain niche within the society, but the paradigm at that time was largely a black-white paradigm. But when there were opportunities to kind of demonstrate that the U.S. was not a racist society, because look at that time, Japanese Americans as a success story. So basically saying, well, we can't be that racist a society because look at Asian Americans. They're educated, they're successful, and so kind of trying to undercut the notion of racism, et cetera, and to try to kind of engender a certain animosity between Asian Americans and other folks, communities of color. And many Asian Americans bought into that notion of saying, yeah, we're not the same as these blacks or Latinos. We're kind of better educated, we're more patriotic, et cetera, et cetera. And just trying to kind of put this in a political context of saying we're being used and if we allow ourselves to be used, when it's good times, everything's fine. But during times of tension, we're going to be scapegoated and used as kind of dividing one group against another group, et cetera. So that's kind of what I tried to write, was try to use what was a established kind of notion of middleman minority, but the examples at that time were being used internationally in other societies and not being applied to Asian Americans. And so that's when I kind of said, this fits for who we were, and helped me to understand our role within the society as a whole. And so that was kind of how I wrote the article. But it was kind of a stream of consciousness little article.
Well, it really helped me at that time when reading it, kind of understand, as well, and exactly what you said. Now, was um, this was before that William Peterson article of the,
Yes.
it was.
Yeah.
So the whole, before the whole model minority and that whole slate of,
It was it was before that Peterson article, but there were other but there were things that were, and that was when at the work I was doing at SC, working with leadership training kind of thing, where Black and Latino, it was pretty clear that the African American and Latino organizations and leaders that we were working with, they pretty much saw Asians as in the same category, camp as white folks, kind of thing, and didn't see us either, in terms of standing up against racism. And so we were kind of seen in many ways, even amongst other communities of color, as being kind of middlemen in that regard. We weren't seen the same as white people, that there was some connection and ability, but there wasn't the same sense of kind of a comradeship between, as kind of equals fighting together on this thing. And so I think that was enlightening for me, and that my initial involvement in working with many of these organizations was pretty much not, was seeing myself as this kind of, not as an Asian American, but as kind of kind of an organizer, programmer, and helping to engage and empower. So almost this missionary notion of, kind of engaging and empowering other communities, and really not looking within our own community and my own sense of kind of what was going on.
yeah, I think it just still resonates, today.
Yes.
Talk about Asians for Black Lives, or talk about Black racism within Asian American communities. I think it's still something that's not over.
Oh, no. We've continued to kind of grapple with, especially with the immigration issue, kind of the role of immigration within our communities has continued to create some of that, the tensions that are evident there.
So returning from Japan, resuming, you decided not to continue your PhD,
Hmm.
and so where did you go from there?
Well, actually, I was thinking of going back and kind of doing my doctoral work. So, but I came back unemployed and didn't know what I was going to be doing, and then we thought we had time, but Angela was born. There were some complications with her delivery, and so we had no insurance, and so we ended up with like about $4,000 in hospital bills, and so we had to pay off Angela in installments over 4 months or 6 months. So I needed to find employment because Yvonne had taken a leave of absence from teaching, so she was scheduled to return the following fall to go back to teaching. And so we didn't really have a ready source of income for that time. And so a friend who had been involved with Asian American Political Alliance, Bob Suzuki, who was the Associate Dean of the College of Education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, uh, contacted me and he said, I understand you're unemployed. He says, you want a job working, And I said, well, I don't want to go back to Amherst, Massachusetts. He goes, oh, no. He goes, you just have to go back every so often. But that we're starting a alternative school in Pasadena. It's part of a national demonstration project. And so would you be, interested in doing that? So it was an exciting project. So I said, sounds good, kind of thing. The notion was to create, it was really the precursor to magnet schools, alternative schools within public education that would be run basically on the same budgets that other schools would be run for. And so it would be, but allowing different ways of teaching. And so we started the school in Pasadena, and it's actually still going, which it was merged with another, but it's doing quite well, kind of thing. And so, I was involved in getting that going. And so I was enjoying that, but during that time, this was the spring of 1972, 72. There was a changing leadership within the Japanese American Citizens League, where their national director who had been there for 30-something years, had announced his retirement. And so there was plans, so they were opening that position. It was really the first national director in 30-something years. And so there was a group of activists within the community that were working with JCL, and they thought this is an opportunity to kind of change the JCL. So they said, Alan, you're the most qualified, you have administrative experience, blah, 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 blah. So I was convinced to apply for that, against my better judgment. And so this was while I was at UMass. And so I applied. There was a lot of organizing. I ultimately was not selected because the old guard in the JCL kind of was afraid of my candidacy, and understandably, I wouldn't blame them. I was afraid too. But we planned to change the JCL dramatically, and so so that was kind of, so when I didn't get that, and there was a big hue and cry around that with the LA region of the JCL threatening to secede from the union as a result of that, et cetera. So that it settled down, but then I was still planning on kind of doing some other things. But then there was a position at Cal State Long Beach that opened up, and I wasn't planning on getting back into higher ed, et cetera, but was convinced to apply. This was kind of working with the early beginnings of the Educational Opportunity Program and some other programs that were opening up higher ed to communities of color that previously were kind of locked out. And so I was convinced to apply, and got the job. And kind of after I was offered that, I kind of checked out the campus, worked with student organizations, and just felt it was an opportunity to really kind of work on a passion of mine, which was where I grew up, I grew up, right next to a housing project in Mar Vista, and saw the impact. I was just fortunate when I was in high school at Venice High. My, I applied. Yeah, I was in certain classes primarily because I guess I don't know they thought I was smart, but I wasn't. My grades were marginal, but this friend of mine said, you know, oh, have you signed up for the SAT? I said, no. I said, what's the SAT? So then, anyway, I signed up, took the SAT without doing the PSAT or any of those things. I did phenomenally well on the SAT, and so because of that, I was accepted to UCLA and Berkeley. And my high school counselor at the time told me, she goes, I don't know how you got accepted. She goes, but if I were you, I would not go because you'll probably flunk out in 1 year because you're not academically prepared to go to a UC. So you're better off going to community college or joining the military. And so, it struck me that that was kind of the advice that I was being given. And it also struck me that, those that I grew up with were primarily black, Latino, and poor whites living in the projects. And I was never taking any classes with them in high school, and they all dropped by the wayside, et cetera. And so I realized that at Long Beach, this was an opportunity because a lot of other students that I grew up with were also bright, capable, but they just weren't given opportunities to go to college. And so I really kind of put together my own life story and kind of said, this is an opportunity to make a difference. And so I got involved with the Educational Opportunity Program and others. And I thought I would be spending a few years at Long Beach, but I just enjoyed the campus, enjoyed the students, and made a life of a career out of being there. And that was really, it ended up being a great opportunity and experience for me. Because UCLA was, it was great time and I enjoyed the work, but it was not something, I really didn't have a fun time there. And it really soured me to teaching, et cetera. But at Long Beach, I found myself at home. The students I was working with, primarily students of color, they're first generation college students that grew up in inner city communities. And I just felt so much more engaged with them. The students at UCLA at that time were all fine. They were, but I didn't feel the same sense of like I was making a difference and, that we were engaged. It just felt more, especially during the acting, it was, doing a lot of administrative things, kind of being the face of the study center, but not really feeling a lot of personal enjoyment from being able to do things. And at Long Beach, I was able to, it was just a great time because I was able to work with a variety of students and, kind of organizing outreach, admitting students. One of our friends, I tell the story, Mike Yanagita, whom when I was at Long Beach, I ran into him, at some party on a Saturday night, and he goes, I would really like to go back to school, and I said, well, I go, what would you like to study? And, so he goes, well, I did a year at Michigan. And, I said, did you leave in good standing? And he goes, yeah. He goes, well, come see me in my office on Monday and bring your transcripts or whatever you have, and I'll get you in, kind of thing. And so we're able to get him in. He was able to be successful. And so there's just, I just love the opportunity to package and work with students, admitting them, outreaching in high school and middle school, admitting, providing services, and seeing students graduate. So that was just a fun time.
Changed Mike's life.
Well, and it was a great, Long Beach was a great place for me to be in terms of my values, and I was just fortunate to have worked with bosses who tolerated me. Just the side story quickly, when I was offered the job at Long Beach, this was by the Vice President for Academic Affairs. And I said, well, thank you. I said, but before I decide, I need to meet with the student organizations. And I met with a student, BSU, La Raza, Asian American Studies, and American Indian Student Organization. And I said, this is an opportunity to bring some of these programs together. I said, but I need your support. And I said, if any one of you, the organizations do not want me in this position, I will not take it. Because if you don't feel I'm the right person, fine, I don't need this job, I can do other things, etc. But they all kind of said, okay, so then I said, okay, given that, what do we need to make this successful? So after I met with the student organizations, and this was outrageous, and I was all of, 27 at that time, then I met with the vice president, and he said, well, are you accepting? I said, well, before I decide, I need to meet with the president. And he says, why do you want to meet with the president? And I told him, because I was so brash, I said, well, I understand from talking to people, the president is the one that makes all the decisions on this campus. And so I said, I need to have assurances from him before I decide. And so he was so upset. He goes, well, I think, this is, I'll have to get back to you. I said, okay, well, I'm done. I've taken it. Then I get a call saying, okay, the president wants to meet with you. So I met with him and told him, okay, I think this is a good job. It's a good opportunity. I said, I need the following. I said, I need budgetary authority. I need additional facility. I need one additional position. And I said, if you give me these things, I said, I think I can make this work. I said, and if 1 year you're not happy with where we're at, you won't have to fire me. I'll quit. I said, because I said, if I can't do something that you feel and I feel, will be positive direction. I said, I can assure you, and I'll put this in writing, you can have my resignation now and decide. And so he was fortunate. He basically said, you got a lot of balls to kind of say this. And he goes, okay, it's done. So then I ended up having to take the job because, and the rest is history. But
So how long were you there?
I know, 35 years. And so it was, and every time I threatened to leave, there was some other things that happened. But anyway, I ended up, I had presidents that I worked with that, like during the, Baki and, anti-for, I would speak at rallies and things like that. Our one president in his first week in office called me into the office and I go, okay. And he says, I just got a call from the, chair of the assembly committee on blah, blah, blah. And he said that you spoke at this rally and, and he says, well, what's up with this? I said, yes, I did speak. I took a vacation day. I paid for it myself. I made clear that I'm speaking on behalf of the university. I'm speaking as an educator and a concerned community member. And, then he goes, basically, okay, that's all I needed to know. He goes, for what it's worth, I agree with you 100%, but I'll have to tell, and so that's kind of how I was just blessed with the career, because during the first probably 25 years of my 35 there, I always had this attitude, and I've always maintained that I've always wanted to be able to say, you can take this job and shove it. That I never wanted to feel that I had to keep a job just for whatever. So, and the thing that I did in Long Beach, which I think was good, is I always had the base and support of students. And that's what allowed me to enjoy my job, but also gave me a certain level of protection because I was known on the campus as someone who enjoyed the support of a variety of student organizations because I was engaged in their activities, et cetera. So it was just a great time for me. I'm sorry, but that's kind of beyond Asian American studies. But that was kind of, where I really found myself. And at UCLA, it was a short career because if I would have stayed as student community, I may have stayed longer because I would have enjoyed that. But the role of acting director for the year was just not fun. And I just decided I didn't want to stay at UCLA. It was a little too elitist. And, the administrative environment, they were just so paternalistic, because I was young and a person of color. And I just said, I don't need this. I want to be able to be in a place where I feel more engaged and be able to make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's really important for leadership training. I mean, it's important for everyone to, and unfortunately, very few of us have been able to learn that or have that taught. I think all of our education. Your favorite dog to your father or whoever, so.
Well, let me, I mentioned, where the first time I found out about Manzanar, because that was a aha experience for me and got me on the path of understanding more of what happened to us at that time, it really brought my home family into context. While I was growing up, my dad was a gardener. He hated his job. He, he was an alcoholic. He would just work to make enough money to provide. Then he would kind of lock himself in the, he'd go into the garage with us, he'd buy a 6-pack of 16-ounce Coors and, kind of drink the rest of the, and then he would come out, we would have dinner, and then he would go to sleep reading the racing form, et cetera. So I had always just thought of him as, kind of a, not someone who enjoyed life. He was just sour on everything. And then after, learning about camp, et cetera, and then just talking with family, I got a very different story of my dad, that I hadn't thought about. That, he owned a grocery store before the war. He was, this was a great time. He and my mom would go out on, Friday night, Saturday night to go see a movie, et cetera. He was, kind of just very actively engaged. He lost the store. He became, bitter in camp, et cetera. And so all I saw was this man who was a gardener who hated his job, drank all the time, never talked to us. Me and my mom never really talked to each other. And, and that was life. And it was rough because one of the personal stories is, he was the gardener. I would assist him as the gardener assistant since I was 8. But in high school, I became more aware of, the social whatevers. And, and I became active in high school and, class representatives, senior class presidents. But my dad would have gardening, jobs in the neighborhoods that some of my fellow classmates grew up in, or were living in. And I was always deathly afraid, that I would be seen by one of my classmates, kind of thing, unloading the gardening truck, mowing the lawns, et cetera. So I would kind of always try to hide, et cetera. And my dad figured it out, he goes, he's embarrassed that, the kind of job and et cetera. And, and my dad died when I was, doing my first year of graduate work. But that's one of my enduring, kind of things I really regret, was the opportunity to sit down with him, to make sense of his life, and to apologize for my lack of kind of understanding of, kind of how his life was different than, how it was kind of taking a path that was different, et cetera. And so the finding out about Manzanar and that was kind of an enduring thing. I mentioned the speech by Stokely Carmichael and the notion of black power. That was kind of an aha moment for me to try to gauge what that meant to be an Asian American. I knew I was not white, I knew I was not black, but it forced me to confront what is my unique sense of who I am and my community, and helped me, it was kind of turned on later as the Asian American movement began to emerge. Another aha experience which I've shared was, we got involved in, I was involved in the 70s in redevelopment, kind of fighting against redevelopment, Little Tokyo, ensuring housing for the seniors who were mostly low income to be able to have replacement housing, creating a cultural center, et cetera. And so very much engaged in, kind of fighting for our Little Tokyo community. And then during the latter part of that, we started getting involved in redress, so this is in the late 70s. And so, I was confirmed as a political activist. And so I saw redress as a political issue. I said, we're not going to win redress, but it's a great way to organize our community, to educate people, and to do it that way. So I was seeing it as a political organizer, that this is a way to do this. And I thought, well, it's an issue, and we'll probably lose, but this will engage people to do stuff. So I was just thinking this very almost manipulative kind of view of how you build communities and movements kind of thing around an issue, and not really thinking about the issue as a in and of itself. And I shared this, but at an educational thing at the Little Tokyo Towers, this Issei woman kind of comes up to me, I think with a crumpled $5 bill, and she says, "I'm sorry, this is all I have, but please use this, for the movement," kind of thing, to win redress. And one of the LTSC counselors who worked with her, she goes, that represents probably, she lives on a fixed income, Social Security. She has no other money, and she goes, that represents, kind of half of her disposable income, kind of thing, and that meant a lot, because I said that's something, that for this woman and for many others, it's personal and it means a lot, and so that was an aha moment that I said, this is beyond a political issue. This is for real, and we have to kind of fight this to the end. And that was tough because at the time, I had, Yvonne and I, Yvonne was busy with her own life. We had started a child care center in Chinatown that, we were busy with. She was involved in teaching. She was involved in the teachers union, many other things. We had two daughters that were at that time probably 5 and 3 in age. And, it was like an aha moment where I'd say, this is for real. It's either put up or shut up for me. That if we're going to work on this issue, we have to go all in. It's not something that, we're just, that we can just kind of cavalierly do to educate, organize, and drop it kind of thing. And so it changed the 80s for me. So I was balancing family, a relatively demanding job with a very, very demanding issue kind of thing. And so that was kind of another moment that I think, kind of struck me. And then the thing, you were at my retirement from Long Beach, and that was a good opportunity for me to kind of sum up my career at Long Beach. And I kind of said this one thing that I said, what I loved about Cal State Long Beach is it's a good institution, but what I worked to try to fight for is a school that the son of a doctor from Newport Beach can drive his BMW onto the campus and drive and take classes, and the daughter of an undocumented immigrant from Huntington Park can take the Blue Line and the 90 bus and also come to Cal State Long Beach. And both of them are coming because they're feeling they're getting a decent education. For the one from Newport Beach, if they weren't getting they didn't feel they were getting a decent education, they wouldn't come to Long Beach. But for the daughter of the undocumented, this is the level of education that she deserves. And if we do it right, then they both benefit from being in the same classes and being able to learn from each other. And that culminated the values that I had brought to Long Beach 35 years earlier. And I was very proud of the legacy that we were able to achieve there. I handled enrollment management. I took that on as additional responsibilities. But when I was leaving Long Beach, we were having, 60, 70,000 freshman applications. And we were faced with a choice. We could have easily chosen the safest route, which was, okay, just raise the GPA and test score requirements. And when we did the simulations of that, we would have been like a UC campus. We would have been comparable to others, to other UC campuses and where the cutoffs would have been, and we could have been seen as, a prestige campus. But some of us pushed, and we said, that's not our job. That's not our mission is to be a regional university and an access point for our communities. And so we said, we want to be able to continue to be diverse, to serve first-generation low-income students, et cetera. And so we created an admissions plan which enabled us, within the context of the Baki and other things, but it enabled us, while we continued to accept students and raise our GPA, and whatever, we continued to increase the number of low-income first-generation college students and increase the enrollment of Latino and African-American students on the campus. So we became more diverse. We became a more academically competitive campus by being a balanced kind of approach. And I thought when I presented the enrollment plan to our academic senate, the faculty were going to kill us because they would say, why don't we just admit the best qualified based on SAT and GPA? But the president and I presented, I said, diversity, serving as a regional thing, I said, is the value of this university. And that I said, I think we should say that any student for whom we are the closest CSU, as long as they're eligible to the CSU system, we should admit them. And then I said there are other campuses that have historic low representation in higher education that we have outreach programs too that we should also kind of extend to those. And surprisingly, the academic senate approved, our enrollment plan, and we were able to kind of achieve all of those things. I was just very proud of that as a capstone of my career in higher education. So I think that was it. And then the last one is, I had retired to start doing a charter school in Little Tokyo. And I think the other defining moment was a week before, when I was in the midst of getting the charter approved and I'd gotten a facility, is, kind of finding out that I had this rare cancer. And at the time, I had, serious surgery, but was told that, if all went well, I'd be able to live a couple years longer. And so it forced me to redefine my life and define what it meant, because, my mortality became much more imminent than ever before that I realized. And that was a defining moment for me because it forced me to look at myself, my mortality. And the good news is, I said, I'm not afraid of death. I mean, if I died tomorrow, so be it, kind of thing. And but it was more, but what do I do with the time that I have, and how do I define that? Because I can't predict how long I have, but what I can do is how I use my time and how they reflect my values and my interests as a person. And so it has allowed me during the past 11 years where it's not been a fun ride. I mean, I've had chemo, 3 times, radiation, I've had 7 surgeries. I mean, but in between those times, I have a heightened appreciation for life, and really it's forced me to be very intentional in my life in terms of what I do and how it reflects who I am as a person. And so that's been, for the last 11 years, the defining thing is that I've had to live with a very serious condition, but I like to say that it's part of who I am, but I've not allowed this to define me. If anything, it's allowed me to define what is important to me in terms of the things that I do and how I spend my time. And community is an important part of that. Engaging with younger generations and giving some sense of the future is a part of that. Family and friends. And so it's been a great run, and it's been one that, despite the health challenges, has probably been, one of the best chapters of my life. And so I think those are the things that I've been